Hello, I'm John Chivacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming to our network geothermal track. This is the first ever full day session dedicated to network geothermal. So thank you so much to John Chivacco and everyone that made it possible for us to be here. So I'm gonna bring up Audrey Schulman, our co-executive director. Thanks, Audrey, take it away.
Okay, cool. And this one's live, good. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to speak slowly while people still come in. I'm sure many of you can recite this at this point if you've seen HEET presentations before, but HEET is funded by foundations and donors and the government. We do not take funding from gas companies, from geo or any industry. Today we want to start off by talking a little bit about, introducing ourselves, basically. I'll start by telling you why I started HEET. Look at that. My eldest child was born in the year 2000. Having him born then made the math really easy in terms of how old he would be at each stage of climate change. In 2030, he'd be 30. In 2040, 40, etc. That easy math made climate change extremely personal to me. And I've been working ever since to make sure that Corey and all children, all of the children in all of our lives, have a better future a better world to live in. And all of us have been doing that, right, in this room? So let's imagine for a moment that all of our work is successful. Let's look through Corey's eyes out at the horizon, and let's assume that he's 50 years old in 2050, and that all of our work has been successful. By now, he's got kids, hopefully, and I hope personally that they're only in middle school at that point. And EVs are everywhere, and they're so fast. By this point, combustion cars seem strange, so loud and smelly and no acceleration. When a combustion car comes down the street, people turn to stare. Cities and highways are just as busy, but they're quiet now. You can hear the birds again. Corey's house with his family is on a thermal network, like his whole neighborhood, the building he works in, and his grocery store. His kids, they don't understand why anyone would pipe an explosive gas into their home and light it on fire to cook their grilled cheese. They think Corey must be making the stuff up. With so few emissions from cars, from homes, from businesses, the air tastes different. There's almost no asthma anymore, not so many strokes. People are living longer and they're healthier. Without the need for fossil fuels, there's fewer resource wars over them. Coal country, mountaintops are starting to regrow. The water is more pure. We have more local energy and more local food. And now I'll turn it to Zeyneb to introduce herself.
So this is part of data transparency, is telling you who we are and our motivation. And yes, we're not afraid of the touchy-feely. These are my children. It's an old photo. They're teenagers now. But love for them and the world they live in is absolutely why I am here today. And why, years after studying physics and global health, I was brave enough to really take into my head the scope of the climate data that we have. And to begin to understand the scale of what we must transform in our lifetimes. And so, as mentioned last night, I think there was a quote about needing to sprint when we're walking right now. I think that's right. And so what that means is we might also have to be brave enough to fall a bit as we're sprinting. And so I began to do whatever I could, even when it felt pretty scary. I went back to school, I changed my career. I volunteered for a NY-GEO panel, scariest of all. I realized at some point that the thing that is far scarier than any of this is to have to tell my kids in the future that I didn't do everything I could. And so I believe right now, as we launch this track for geothermal networks, that we're in an innovation curve. We're in that learning and innovation curve where there's a lot of small mistakes we have to make. And so that's how I want to start us off, is for all of us as we go forward in this track to be brave enough to ask questions, to not know things, to make mistakes, and to learn from each other. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Audrey to introduce the organization HEET, and then we're going to stop talking about ourselves and the organization and get into the meat of the birth of a new utility.
So the basics of HEET: we are a nonprofit climate solutions incubator. We iterate on our ideas with all stakeholders to surface for problems before they happen. And so this photo is of one of our meetings. Attending is an activist who did a 30-day hunger strike against gas peaker plants. And he's standing near a gas utility executive who is standing near a gas labor union leader. And they are all in the same room with the person who came up with the term clean bridge fuel. We work with everybody. And they're all smiling and there's no fisticuffs, which is sort of amazing. And we root all of our work in science and data to make sure everybody trusts what we say, hopefully. And now I'm going back to Zeyneb.
Yeah, this is actually how we work. So this is a map of our gas infrastructure in Boston. And some of that pipe went in the ground in the time of Lincoln's presidency in the 1850s, actually before his presidency. And it's still in use today. And it's kind of miraculous, actually. It's an extraordinary physical infrastructure. And I wonder if they imagined the scale of what those first pipes would become. How long would they last? Did they have a plan when they first put in the pipes? Because it seems really relevant today as we put in the first pipes in the ground for geothermal networks. Whether or not, how much we have to have everything worked out as we move forward. So back in 2016, Audrey and I began to focus on the building energy transition as the hardest unsolved piece of the meeting climate goals, and quickly realized that, again, the data was a little bit grim. When you looked at how many buildings we had to transition, how much infrastructure had to be transitioned, how many people, individuals, were involved in this, and also, most importantly, the rate we were going then and currently, we have to do a massive acceleration. We had to do something different. And so that's where we were when we proposed avoiding some of the risks that were presented over the next decades in this transition, and using both that social and technical systems change that Audrey briefly covered, to propose in 2017 that a transition to networked ground source heat pumps, particularly and specifically for the gas utility industry, had the potential to deliver all the outcomes that we needed: safety, reliability, affordability, an equitable and just transition with workforce, improved health, and of course, lower emissions. And at the speed and scale we needed, which is a really important piece not to leave out. The name of this technology that we're going to discuss today, I just want to briefly address the tremendous need for unification of definition. It's been called GeoGrid, Geo-Microdistrict Thermal Energy Network, Clean Thermal Energy Network, C10s, 5G HDGC, fifth generation district heating and cooling, GeoNet, HeatNet, and the list just seems to grow every day. I think I left off ambient temperature loop, ATLs. I got it. And I just want to say a rose by any other name. I mean a C10 by any other name. The name is not what matters. What matters is that we know what we're talking about. So here is a brief definition of what we're considering today. It does not mean that other things are not viable in many locations or wonderful, but for today, we are looking at decentralized heat pumps, ambient temp, so that's not a classic district energy system with a central source, right? Ambient temperature water in a single pipe shared loop. We can leave glycol in there, but ambient temperature single pipe loop. And then in the design, a stochastic load calculation, so sizing for the population for the stochastic rather than the summed load, and opportunistic design, using local thermal opportunities. And what I mean by that is, of course, that if you have a situation, everything is location dependent. If you have a situation where you have an amazingly, perfectly balanced two thermal source and thermal sink, you can connect them and skip the boreholes. All right, that counts, but most of the time, it's not going to work out quite that way, and then things change over time too, don't they? So just to get us on the same page there, I'm just gonna, the next part, we're gonna quickly attempt to set a shared goal for what it is we're taking on. So whatever we called these lovely things, geothermal networks, what is the impact we're going for? Are we gonna meet the scale of the need?
Okay, we're both data-based, and I'm a super anxious person. Let's skip to the really big question. Can we do this? There are 111 million buildings in the US. The conditioned total square footage is basically the size of Maryland.
Yeah, so Maryland, I mean, that's better than the whole US, right? Doesn't that look doable? Not really.
If we conservatively assume that 30% of all those buildings move to networked geothermal, that means 3,400 buildings a day for 27 years.
Yeah, so that's a little scarier. But I really believe we have to set our goals based on what we need to accomplish and not what we think we can do. And I think that's another theme we want to keep coming back to. So let's do it. If we accomplish it, that's 1,600 natural gas power plants, according to the EPA equivalency calculator. The rest of those buildings will leave up to the individual ground source and air source heat pumps. And, you know, in 10 years, we'll come back and check in on how we're doing, and maybe we'll take on a bigger percentage. But for now, 37 million buildings. You ready? All right, I love that there were yeses. And so what is that in terms of workforce and jobs? I mean, think about that. And then what about for industry, for drilling? What's the size of that industry in dollars if we do that? So I'm going to leave that up to the folks that are not running a nonprofit to calculate that. But I think that the impact is enormous, but also the task is enormous. And so it's like this elephant where we actually can't see the future. We can't move forward 10 or 30 years. So it's going to take a lot of us with a lot of perspectives to figure out the way forward to transitioning 37 million buildings to geothermal networks. And we're going to have some help. We're going to need a lot of help. All of us in this room, we need everyone in this conference, we need that across the country, across the world, and then multiple times that. And so one of the ways to do that is just what's happened here at NY-GEO, where you have a growing pie. Instead of worrying about dividing up the pie we had a few years ago, we've just grown the pie. There's more people here, there's more industries here, there's more voices. And so what we're going to do here with our panel is try to grow the pie even more and take in other aspects of this transition that, we're multi-solving. We're not just solving climate, we're solving a bunch of other stuff at the same time. And so each of those groups adds a voice and a benefit. And so I'm going to very happily introduce our panelists. We're going to start with Dr. Jonathan Bounocore, Assistant Professor at Boston University School of Public Health. And he's going to help us add health to the pie, creating more opportunity for the industry.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm gonna adjust this. Okay. So Zeyneb said she wanted to make the problem bigger. I'm going to talk about four different ways that heat pumps can benefit public health, other than through providing heating and cooling. And Zeyneb did mention, thank you. Zeyneb did mention that she wants to make the problem bigger, so we're going to start here. This is an animation produced by a very fancy atmospheric pollution model produced by NASA. And it's showing the interconnected nature of air pollution globally. You can see right now that gold color there, that's dust blowing off of the Sahara, and yes, getting to the Caribbean. You can see kind of storms blowing off the east coast of the US and eastern Canada, affecting England, Ireland, and France. The white that you saw in Eastern Europe, that is sulfur pollution coming from coal-fired power plants, mostly in Poland and Germany, hitting most of Europe. Now it's going to go over to China. This is 2006, so it's a long time before the sort of air apocalypse years in Beijing, but you can kind of see the preconditions meteorologically that made it possible for that to happen, where you have these sulfur plumes like getting stuck in the valley and just kind of accumulating for days before a storm moves through and blows the air out. Going to move over to Indonesia, which the green there is a forest fire. Moving on to Australia, where you can see here there's, again, another landscape fire around, I think that's south of Sydney. And you can see that blowing and hitting New Zealand, and it's getting caught up in this circulation pattern that goes around Antarctica. So with that, you can see that some of the smoke from those fires in Australia definitely hits New Zealand, makes its way all the way to Patagonia, and then down here in Argentina and Chile, you can see air pollution from forest fires making its way all the way to South Africa, crossing the ocean. Here, that big white burst there, that's a volcano off the coast of Madagascar. And here you're seeing, again, kind of biomass and landscape fires in sub-Saharan Africa, affecting a lot of the continent and crossing the ocean again, and affecting air pollution in Brazil and Colombia and Venezuela and the other countries in northern South America there. This is going to slide over again. And those little white plumes in Mexico, those are, I believe, mostly oil-fired power plants, emitting pretty hefty amount of sulfur there. And this is going to spin over the Pacific. So here you can see there's, the blue is sea salt dust, the green is biomass, and the red and yellow, it's dust blowing off of the Gobi Desert that has the ability to cross the ocean and affect air quality in California and Washington State and British Columbia. And here you can see, again, another set of biomass fires in Southeast Asia. And I think this will be the end of the animation here. So Air pollution, it's a thing. It kills, last I checked, about 9 million people a year. A fair amount of this air pollution comes from buildings, a fair amount of this comes from the electrical grid, and if you think about that portion of that, that's a pretty large public health benefit that geothermal can have through reducing air pollution. So this is an excerpt from a paper that I worked on a few years ago. One of the main takeaways from this is that heat pumps, they can reduce air pollution emissions from buildings. 15 years ago or so, most air pollution in the United States was from coal and coal-fired power plants, and largely for electricity generation. So with some of the regulations that had been passed, mostly in the Obama administration, those impacts got cut from about 60,000 lives a year down to about 10,000. So with coal kind of out of the way, it ended up being the case that the health impacts of these sources was, the lead was kind of almost like a tie between the remaining coal-fired power plants, biomass, which is largely from wood-fired stoves, which again, geothermal could replace, along with gas use in buildings, and some use in industry, being all the leading contributors to health impacts from air pollution. And one of the other kind of takeaways from this, again, is a quote that went sort of viral from the paper, which is that swapping out one combustion fuel for another is not a pathway for a healthy energy system. Since one of the leading fuel types here was wood, a lot of people think wood is carbon neutral, and one of the kind of takeaways from this paper was that, even if you're perfectly carbon neutral, renewable natural gas or wood or whatever it is like hand delivered to you by like an angelic bike messenger, when you burn it, it is still going to produce air pollution, and it will still harm health, no matter how it gets to you, no matter how carbon neutral people are trying to tell you it is. Next, reducing gas production can have major public health benefits. This is from a paper that'll be coming out in a few weeks. We found that the health impacts of oil and gas production, there's about 7,500 deaths per year, 2,200 new asthma cases, and 410,000 asthma attacks per year. We call them exacerbations because we have to be fancy. This is largely regional air pollution, so you'll note on the map there that some of the areas you'd expect to be impacted, like southwest Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh, Texas, Oklahoma, are pretty heavily impacted by this, along with Colorado. Other strange areas may jump out, like New York City, which is pretty far away from oil and gas production, Boston, which is pretty far away from oil and gas production, Washington, D.C., Miami, Orlando, Los Angeles, and a lot of areas in like Minnesota, all affected by pollution from oil and gas production, even though they don't have any going on in their state. So this is air pollution that's crossing state boundaries and harming health in other states. We'll note that this is just regional air pollution. There's a lot of local hazardous air and water pollution that communities that are hosting oil and gas production are exposed to. That's not included here. And we're kind of in the process of separating out what of this is from gas versus what of this is from oil. Third, what's in the gas? It's methane, there's a little bit ethane, and then there's a lot of stuff that everybody's kind of afraid to talk about. There's a lot of cancer-causing, fancy word is carcinogenic, and hazardous air pollutants that are essentially contaminants in the gas stream. These have been found in California and Massachusetts so far, and research is underway to probably find it in most other gas streams. So if you smell a gas leak, you're being exposed to methane. You're also being exposed to benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, hydrogen sulfide, formaldehyde, and a lot of really harmful compounds that have a to-be-quantified public health impact. And one of the interesting things here is we found that it seems to vary a lot by utility company, varies a lot by location, and can vary a lot by season. And we don't really know why yet. Fourth, is that efficient heat pumps can reduce the grid load and reduce the consequent emissions of that. So this is from a paper that came out about a year ago, basically showing that if we were to electrify all, like snap a finger, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, and all buildings are electrified, this will put a very large load on the grid in the winter. This is really difficult to meet with just wind, solar, and storage. And one of the best ways to kind of make the work of the grid easier is by installing more efficient heat pumps. So as you increase your coefficient of performance, that's a lot less work that the electrical grid needs to do. And can make it a lot easier to electrify in a way that is both actually reducing carbon emissions and healthy. And again, this is important since if this is done incorrectly, you run the risk of prolonging the use of fossil fuels on the grid. You may also run the risk of prolonging or encouraging the use of biomass or biofuels, which again, even if it is carbon neutral, is not health neutral. And the other kind of danger of this, there's also the danger of renewable hydrogen, which again, if it's combusted, it will still produce air pollution, still have health harms. And doing efficient electrification is a good way to avoid a lot of these consequences. So with that, just again, heat pumps, especially the efficient ones, big benefits for public health and the climate. You can reduce air pollution from buildings. You can reduce total air pollution as long as you're powering it by renewables. More efficient makes that easier. And you could reduce impacts from production of natural gas. And another kind of larger point is that this does really demonstrate that energy infrastructure could be a major determinant of public health. If you want to find a group of very strong advocates for anything who will go talk to anybody on your behalf, it's really good to make friends with doctors. They make really good advocates. The way you make friends with them is talk about health benefits for their patients. And energy could be a really big determinant of public health, but that requires public health to actually be at the table. I've heard a lot of talk in the last couple days about talking about cost benefits, a little bit about equity and environmental justice. This is what we do. We're ready. Come talk to us. We're ready to make friends. And with that, thank you. Here's my email address. A slice of what I talked about is available on the website for the COBE. I think the website's kobe.forhealth.org. You can sign up for a mailing list on the QR code. I also dropped a bunch of stickers on all the tables, so sign up to our mailing list. And if you want to figure out the health benefits of your projects, the tool will be online soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, so we've added public health. Thank you, Jonathan. And part of making the pie bigger is having a lot of different viewpoints. But the next one I think is so critical, and it was touched on briefly by the Falcon curve that Jonathan shared of the efficiency and its impact on the electric grid. And so we're really glad to have David Podorson of Xcel Energy here to talk about why that's so motivating from a utility perspective and what the hopes are to learn more.
Thanks, everyone. Again, David Podorson from Xcel Energy. I can't say that this is Xcel Energy's formal opinion on this. This is me and my team's opinion on this. It hasn't been, we haven't gotten executive approval. We don't have any formal Xcel Energy goals, but I'm going to walk through some of the processes that we've walked through in order to build a business case for this. So first off is that Xcel Energy has a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. The subtitle here is a very polite way of saying we have no idea how we're going to get there. Nobody really does. This is one of, again, my team and I are very excited about to add to the acronym list. We call it community ground source heat pumps, but ambient temperature loops, whatever you want to call it. If you look at if you electrified everything and got to 80% decarbonization, this is what our electric grid would look like on a peak cold day in Minnesota. This is 80% decarbonization, not 100%. Everything comes down to space heating in terms of peak demand. Peak demand is what matters the most to us. It's what we have to build all our infrastructure in order to meet, right? So everybody talks about electric vehicles taking over the world. Electric vehicles are nothing compared to peak space heating demand on a cold winter day. The other data point that we really had to get in order to, convince our executives is that air source heat pumps keep getting better. They're in the news. The New York Times writes about air source heat pumps, but they're not going to advance enough to deal with peak cold conditions efficiently. Really glad to have this data point finally. We can't, when we speak to executives, we have to make it very simple, right? So you can't say, well, we think that this and that. Now we have a data point, right? So right now, our current generation of air source heat pumps with the NY-GEO cold climate air source spec, which is great. That's our current generation. In 2025, we'll have Department of Energy's cold climate air source heat pump challenge. The DOE challenges are when they put out an incentive for manufacturers to create new best-in-class equipment. So Department of Energy is sponsoring manufacturers to make air source heat pumps that are better in cold conditions than anything that currently exists. Those will be out by 2025. The Minnesota Center for Energy Environment, however, wanted to look at the grid impacts of all this, so they modeled air source heat pumps that have unprecedented performance and will likely never exist, and said, well, what would that look like on our grid? And even these imaginary air source heat pumps of unprecedented performance still broke our electric grid, right? They still set new cold winter peaks that were roughly 50% beyond our current peaking system. So air source heat pumps aren't going to get here. And they're definitely not going to get here in time, right? Even if future models came out that were great, we have, Xcel Energy, we have 2.5 million customers that we have to convince to buy them and install them in the right way. So it's just not going to happen. So community ground source heat pumps can be the new steel for fuel. Steel for fuel was a strategy that Xcel Energy took in wind power. Basically, the idea is that we don't earn any profit on the fuel that we sell to customers or the fuel that we burn in a power plant. We just pass those costs directly on to our customer. If we spend $1 million on fuel to burn a power plant to make electricity, customers pay that cost. So instead of spending all of this money on fuel and passing those costs on to our customers, we could spend money on infrastructure that avoids the need for fuel and keep customers' bills the same or lower, and then earn more profit. Because we do earn profit on infrastructure, we don't earn profit on fuel. So that was our win strategy, which has worked great. And this is, community ground source heat pump is exactly that same model. So significant opportunity for rate-based capital infrastructure, right? Any pipes you put in the ground will earn from. It displaces all those future fuel costs with infrastructure costs. It increases revenue for us, avoids future costs. We hypothesize, we're doing the math on it, we're not done yet, that it's going to be good for everybody, that we're going to lower customer bills, we're going to earn more money from it on the utility side than any other future scenario. So that's our hypothesis. We're trying to prove that out. And we lead the clean energy transition. And if you look at traditional decarbonization pathways, nothing really works. And community ground source heat pumps help mitigate a lot of those problems. So if you just say, okay, let's keep the gas utility in place, keep our gas pipes in place, and just burn it as backup fuel, everyone could get an air source heat pump and keep the gas system in place for when they really need it. What happens then? Well, what happens is the utility death spiral. What happens is that as customers use less gas, the price of gas keeps increasing. As the price of gas increases, more and more people say, well, I don't need this in my house, and they stop using it, and it spirals. I'm actually not allowed to say those words, so when I speak to executives, it's nice to be here. I could say whatever I want. So keeping a gas utility model in place just as a backup, creates that spiral and also puts the lowest income customers in the most hardship, people that can't convert. If we just said, okay, well, let's just electrify everything. Do we even need a gas grid? You saw the graph, that was 80% decarbonization. So it's a massive investment and incredibly difficult to decarbonize. So to build enough clean renewable fuel for that is incredibly difficult. If we rely on renewable fuels, renewable fuels are more expensive, so that's going to exacerbate the gas death spiral model. There's limited availability. There's only so much we could physically produce, and there's just limited supply, right? So after the low-hanging fruit, it's just going to get more and more expensive to create enough renewable fuels for that. So all these traditional pathways for decarbonization have lots of challenges with them. But if you look at community ground source heat pumps, this model mitigates all of these challenges. So keeping the gas utility in place while investing in community ground source heat pumps is a great benefit. So if customers are still paying into our pipes network, then it's stabilizing rates. It's not creating an asset that we have to maintain that's hardly used ever. So equitable maintenance, we're paying into it, and it stabilizes rates in the future. Building new electric generation, the research that we've seen, community ground source heat pumps mitigate peak demand roughly 40%. 40% from a regular ground source heat pump system, so even more from an air source heat pump system. So that much less electric generation to build to. Easier to decarbonize, also maintains lower rates if you just have that much less peak demand to build to. And the use of renewable fuels. So first of all, you could use the lowest hanging fruit for the most difficult to decarbonize sectors. So all the industrial sectors that are hard to decarbonize, that's what you could save the renewable fuels for. And second, you don't have to drill boreholes and design community ground source heat pump systems to meet polar vortex conditions. You could design them for design temperatures, put in a boiler, a hydrogen or renewable natural gas boiler, a renewable fuel boiler, and save the fuels for when you really need it. It's a perfectly decent strategy. So you could just save the fuels for when they're actually needed and not have a whole piping network that's essentially abandoned except for the peak cold days. So this is our business case. We have it. Sorry, I didn't put a contact slide, but I'm sure you could get my contact information from folks here. We're currently working on the math on what these future scenarios would look like. That'll be the next data point for executives trying to get buy-in on the executive level on that. But we haven't finished with that. So hopefully next time I'm up here, I'll have another slide that shows all the numbers and says, look, 5 is greater than 3. You should do this. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And if anyone took photos or wants to tweet out a quote, please show respect to everyone and don't get David in trouble with his bosses and check with him first. Thank you. And I think the only segue I can come up with is the use of the term community heat pumps. And we had a guest who unfortunately had an elder father's health decline rapidly and couldn't be in person, but we instead have a video recorded. And it really opens up the word community and shares a story that we all find inspiring at HEET of the building of a geothermal greenhouse to grow a community to address environmental justice, food justice, and more. So.
You're going to do it? So It's Will Hardesty-Dyck. Hold on, and should go right.
Hi everyone, my name is Will Hardesty-Dyck. I'm the greenhouse manager here at Eastie Farm in East Boston. We're an organization dedicated to food justice, food access, environmental education, and building strong, resilient communities here in East Boston and beyond. So I'm here to talk a little bit today about our greenhouse, which we've just finished construction of, and which is heated and cooled 100% by a closed loop ground source heat pump system. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pull up some slides for us to look at. So we're really excited about this project as a model of community-centric, climate-sensitive development in a dense urban area that's underserved, both from the food aspect and then also in terms of climate justice. We live in an EJ community, environmental justice community. So we're excited to be developing this here. So to start us off, this is a quote unquote worm's eye view of our geothermal system and the greenhouse on top of it. So what we're looking at right now, we're looking up from below. We're underground here, and those purple tubes with the spindly things coming out represent our 3 455-foot vertical wells that we've got. So our system's vertical. And connected to those wells are 2 water furnace HVAC units, and altogether we have got about 8 tons of capacity in this system. So here's a couple pictures of our installation. We had to really jump through some logistical hoops, as I'm sure you can imagine, doing a build like this on a very small parcel of land, in between houses, in between billboards, very difficult street access, but we were able to do it, and we hope that shows that it's possible in all sorts of neighborhoods. So on the left here, we've got the geothermal drillers putting in the vertical wells, and on the right, we've got our HVAC contractors finishing up above ground. So we had this system up and running at the end of last year, October 2022. And it's working really well so far. So we've been able to hold temperature all winter for the most part. And we've had a few dips below the set point, but nothing unexpected, and we haven't had incredible amounts of loss from that. So it provides an excellent environment for growing plants, but also for welcoming people and providing a space for them to connect and learn and build community. So one thing I do want to point out too is that in conjunction with our geothermal system, we're running all the pumps and fans using Boston's Community Choice Electricity Program, which allows us to choose to source 100% of our energy from renewable sources. So our greenhouse is completely zero emissions, no carbon emissions associated with its operation, which we're incredibly excited about. So on the left here, we've got a picture from last fall. As you can see, we were doing some leafy greens production, and then also still had some more heat-loving crops going in the greenhouse. So we've got some basil there, some eggplant, and some peppers. And now in the spring, we're in peak seedling production time. So we've got probably close to 2,000 seedlings in here right now that are getting ready to go out into the community through our seedling sale and through other efforts. And later on this year, we'll also be producing some more food out of the space. Beyond that, though, it's a great place for children of all ages, I would say, to come and learn about food systems, about the environment. So we've been really fortunate to welcome multiple classes of Boston Public School kids, into the space. So they come in, they learn about geothermal, they learn about climate science a little bit, they learn about food systems and how to grow things, how to grow their own food, and they just have a great time doing it, and so do we. So we're really, really excited to have that sort of space. We also run food distribution. So besides the food that we produce, we bring in food from partners in the region, fresh, local produce, and are able to distribute that to our neighbors here in East Boston, which is underserved by fresh food outlets. And really what we were always hoping this space would be is a hub, a space for community to come together beyond food production, beyond food distribution, just a space for people to exist and get to know one another, get to know their neighbors, and have a great time doing it, maybe learn something along the way. So we've had potlucks, for example, we've had game nights, we've had dance nights, we have volunteer work parties. It's really a space that we're hoping to keep alive in all senses of the word, and building community. And that's all thanks to the geothermal heating. We're able to keep it comfy in the winter. We're able to keep it a little bit cooler than you might expect a greenhouse to be in the summer. And we're able to host people, and that's what we're all about. So we're excited. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you.
That's pretty much the most intersectional geothermal story we could come up with. So, and I just want to share one thing that wasn't shared, which is that the idea for the geothermal greenhouse actually came from one of the children that participate in Eastie farms, and then they made it real. So it's one of those places where you go and you, oh my goodness, we should have this everywhere. But that intersection of education and environmental justice and energy is a wonderful way for us to grow the pie. In some ways, make the problem bigger or take on more of a large problem, which what all of our speakers have done. And I want to turn it over to you because all of you, yep, oh, there we go. So, oh, no.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will Hardesty-Dyck.
1 second.
There we go. There we go. Oh,
Okay.
1 second. Previous.
Thank you, Angie. Yeah. So we want to turn it over to you and ask you what else can we include in the narrative to, you can look at it as glass half full or glass half empty, make the problem bigger or grow the pie. However you want to frame it, what else can we include to bring even more people into the room and moving forward on geothermal networks?
Hi. So this is a prompt for you all. This is a Slido poll. I don't know if anybody's ever used one in here. You can pull out your phone and contribute to the conversation. What else can we include in this narrative? We talked about public health, community resilience, our electric grid. What else is missing?
You can scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in the code right there.
And while you're doing that, we want to give you a little time. We want to turn to the panelists who are here with us and ask them in part the same kind of question, and then we'll leave it up to you to ask them questions as well. So starting with Jonathan, kind of specifically, how does adding public health to the narrative grow the pie or give us more opportunities to move geothermal networks forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think
Can
my microphone is off among many other things. Oh, that's wow, switches, they're great. Yeah, so I think there's public health is a lot of things. The biggest thing that I see, though, is, again, like, air pollution from buildings has a very strong role with public health, and air quality regulation is an environmental justice. So to date, like, most air quality regulations have mostly gone after like power plants and industrial sources and those kinds of things. But as we keep finding harms of air pollution, as the epidemiology gets better, the standards keep getting lowered, and as standards keep getting lowered, we have to go after more and more different air pollution sources. And one of the things from that research was showing that buildings and these smaller electric power plants are playing a much stronger role than they used to, which means as the national ambient air quality standards get lower, the regulations have to get a little more creative and potentially starting to go after buildings. So there could be a world where installing geothermal is a part of how the state complies with the air quality regulations, and part of how the state complies with sort of equity and environmental justice considerations, because a lot of these polluting sources are in neighborhoods that already have too many of them, and you all have a tool to get rid of a major source. And there's a lot of people that want to get rid of major sources, so talk to your local air quality regulator.
And David, would you like to answer the same question? Not in terms of health, but how can the electric grid add to this conversation?
So in terms of intersectionality, I would say, the impacts on low-income customers as we decarbonize. I mean, it's been an ongoing problem. Solar. It started with the solar industry. Solar was bad for low-income customers for the same reasons. In investing in our pipes network will help stabilize rates and keep it lower for everyone in the future for the customers that can't afford to replace all their equipment. Off the top of my head, that's I think what my answer is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful answer. Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the incredible questions up here. We're going to save them and use them to make sure that we're thinking through how we work forward. I'm going to briefly go back to the presentation. Sorry, we're running low on time, so I'm going to, I said, I'm the anxious one. And we're going back to the presentation. I'm going to tell you briefly what we will be presenting on later this day in the same room here, the room to be in. And I think it is measuring success is next. The data we need. It'll be here from 11:30 on, and then the policy and the people we need. It's going to be fascinating. It'll be moderated by Ania, who is the best moderator ever. Then we will have the scaling efficiently. Did I skip the utility of a utility?
Yeah, you might have it in the wrong order. Yep.
Okay, whatever. There will also be the utility of a utility, hosted by Morgan, the incredible Morgan Hood. She will be talking about how utilities can move this all forward. And then we'll go on at 4 o'clock to scaling efficiently. There we go. Scaling efficiently, how we'll build this grid together. And that's at 4 o'clock, and then it's going to be fabulous, and Zeyneb will be moderating it. And then finally, the best possible part, we're all going to meet here again. We're going to be giving out small gifts to everybody, and we'll sign the Declaration of Thermalification with a nice pen, right? So you all want to be here to get your John Hancock or Jane Hancock on that one. Don't forget. And then finally, I will end with this slide. And this is, gas infrastructure in Boston. It's a map of the gas pipes. And you can see up in the corner that, that 1857 date. That's a pipe that went in before the Civil War, and it's still being used. So let us think all of the things that have happened since that pipe went in. We stopped slavery. We gave women the vote. We allowed them to own property. That's nice. We changed from a 60-hour-per-week work week to a 40-hour one. We did civil rights. Yay! We've done all these incredible things in that time that that pipe has been in the ground. So let us pause here and think through, what is the future we want for this next infrastructure? We can do good. We can make progress. We can create a better world. Let's do it all, and let's work for it together. Thank you so much.